An early morning haze hangs over Kingston Harbor as the Indian Ocean Research vessel Sagar Kania arrived in Jamaica at the start of a special mission. For the next 7 weeks, it will carry out a comprehensive survey of the Caribbean Sea, gathering data and information that will help the Commonwealth countries of the region explore their marine resources for economic development without damage to the environment. In what seemed like no time at all, Sagar Kania was ready with its welcome. This was meant partly for the Caribbean scientists who were joining the vessel here, many of whom had already spent 3 months in India preparing for the survey. Their voyage would take them into the exclusive economic zones of the 13 countries taking part in the survey. The welcome was also for the many Jamaican and other dignitaries interested in the survey, which itself was part of a larger project for the region, whose countries are all maritime states, and as such are in an immediate position to benefit from the exploration of their marine resources.
Actually, the real benefits of this project are not even going to be those which will accrue in the immediate terms, and there are those benefits, but the benefits which will accrue in the longer term, particularly as the pressure on the land-based resources become more intense as a result of the tremendous increase in our populations. So increasingly, we are going to have to turn to the marine areas. And this is the beginning of the information which will allow us to systematically exploit those resources in a sustainable manner.
Jamaica's Minister of State, John Juna, had this concept of exploitation in a sustainable manner very much in his mind as he listened to some of the Indian scientists talking about their work. But what are some of the possibilities for exploitation?
We're hoping that the information we get from this project will allow us to develop our fisheries, will allow us to look at the possibilities of new plants from the ocean, which could help to develop industries. It might point us into the direction of using things like temperature differences in the ocean for generating energies. These are some of the examples of the possibilities.
And so it was time for the official send-off. A coconut broken on deck by Dr. A.P. Mitra, Director General of India's Council for Industrial and Scientific Research. Then came the turn of the Jamaican minister with a bottle of champagne.
Give space there, gentlemen. He's not a very experienced at breaking bottles.
I don't often do this.
With the flagging off ceremony over and the dignitaries back on shore, it was time for Sagar Kania to begin the historic scientific expedition. In the fading light of Jamaica's tropical dusk, the moorings were slipped, and with 30 selected scientists on board, 14 from India and 16 from the Caribbean, it was all systems go for departure. Long before nightfall, the vessel would be in open water, free of the tug that guided it out of Kingston Harbor, and well on its way to Belize on the first leg of the survey. It would return to Jamaica 1 week later for the second leg, to the Bahamas, the Leeward Islands, and Barbados, then on to St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Grenada, and Trinidad on the third leg, with a fourth and final leg through Tobago to Guyana. The 4,200-ton vessel is one of the most advanced and sophisticated oceanographic research vessels in the world. It has 13 labs spread over 3 decks. The labs are fully equipped to carry out research in geology, the weather, chemical and physical oceanography, and marine biology. They will all be used during the survey to establish what hydrocarbons, minerals, or metals lie beneath the sea, to record data that would lead to a better understanding of wave, tide, hurricane, and other weather patterns, to identify the best fishing grounds, to look at such areas as pollution, coastal erosion, possibilities for growing marine food crops, and protection of the environment. There will also be other activities designed to give the governments of the region the information they need to help them benefit from their exclusive economic zones. Here in the Echo Sounder room, a Caribbean scientist works closely with his Indian counterpart in coming to grips with measuring the depth of the sea and the topography of the seabed in general. What does this Caribbean scientist see as the benefits of the survey?
Basically, I see two benefits coming out of this cruise. First is the accumulation of baseline data in the different oceanographic disciplines, and secondly, it gives us a core of trained scientists who have some experience in oceanography. These scientists can then relate to their various governments and enable their governments to make more informed decisions about the marine environment around our islands.
Though not an island, Belize is also one of the 13 participating countries in the project. Two of its scientists, Brett Graham and Justin Hulse, are pursuing different areas of research in the survey, but all geared to their national interests. How do they see the survey being helpful to Belize?
Okay, this survey is going to provide a lot of basic geological data that will help us understand what's happening on our outer shelf a whole lot. And this in turn will help us to increase the chances of we're finding oil or other minerals in our waters. Could mean a lot to Belize economically in the long run.
I'm interested in the depth of the water over the Western Caribbean. We're preparing a storm surge model for Belize, and storm surge are produced by hurricanes. This is the water that the hurricanes forces over the beach. Most of the disruptions associated with hurricanes are caused by storm surge. Way back in 1961, more than 200 people died from hurricanes, and most of them was due to the flooding in the coastal areas caused by storm surge. With this information from our model, planners could evacuate the people from the areas that would be affected by the storm surge, and we would save lives.
As it turned out, much useful information was gathered about the weather, not only near Belize, but also in the wider Caribbean as well. There was also good news for the Belize fishing industry, as large potential fishing grounds were identified off the country's east coast. Overall, the project known as CORE, which stands for Caribbean Oceanographic Resources Exploration, had as a major aim an assessment of the productivity potential of the exclusive economic zones of the 13 participating countries. It also aimed to establish the degree of pollution in the Caribbean waters, study the dynamics of these waters, and identify areas with indications of gas and oil deposits that could be viably explored. Put another way, the project was asked to acquire data on the living and non-living resources of the Caribbean Sea, as well as baseline data usable for environmental protection. Apart from succeeding in doing this, it also enhanced the capability of the Caribbean countries to investigate, understand, and use their marine resources wisely. And it created an ocean resource database for the region that is now invaluable as a platform for future economic activities. The project offered a new model of Commonwealth scientific cooperation, which has produced a core of 70 scientists from 9 countries, among them several women. These scientists have been exposed to lectures, lab work in various aspects of oceanography, and the use of sophisticated marine instruments. This gives them the ability to carry out oceanographic research in a wide range of marine sciences. What were the hopes and aspirations of the women scientists on board at the start of the survey?
Gaining some practical experience in the whole area of oceanography as a follow-up to our 2.5 months training in Goa. And basically to just work together with our fellow Caribbean participants and getting some data on the region.
I'm looking forward to experiencing the different aspects of oceanography that are available on board the ship. And as well, Jamaica is interested in investigating turbulence off the western coast of Jamaica. So in all, I'm very excited about it, and I hope to learn a lot from this experience.
Okay, I think this survey is very important because it will be generating a lot of baseline data. I'm particularly interested in marine pollution, particularly oil pollution, and we have done a fair amount of work in Jamaica, but this gives us an opportunity to look further offshore and around other islands in the Caribbean Sea, and this is very important in terms of assessing what exactly is happening in the Caribbean.
Okay, we'll be looking at plankton productivity, geology, mapping of the ocean floor, meteorology, and all these will be done at specific stations in our cruise from Jamaica to Belize and back. We'll be able to get a more overall picture of what is happening in the Caribbean in a greater area and also in a lot different fields and not specifically concentrating on one thing.
About 25 Caribbean scientists were expected to take part in the 45-day survey. But there was a clamor to join what was without doubt the biggest ever scientific and technological expedition in the Caribbean Sea. In the end, about 70 scientists from the region were accommodated, taking turns to stay on board during the various legs. For the sake of continuity, however, 8 of them, representing different disciplines, stayed on the cruise for the entire 45 days. Among them was Sarah Jennings-Clark, a fisheries biologist from St. Lucia, who was asked what aspect of the survey she thought would be helpful to her.
I think mainly it's getting the practical experience of using the equipment that's on board the vessel, because that's something that I've kind of lacked in the past. So hopefully after going through this cruise I can have an idea of what sort of equipment, as far as lab facilities, we should get in St. Lucia to continue monitoring the kind of oceanographic parameters that we're looking at here.
The range of scientific and research equipment on board Saga Kania has to be vast in order to cover the many various types of experiments carried out on the vessel. The plankton net, for example, is used for collecting samples from the ocean that will help give the scientists on board such information as the amounts and type of fish available in a given area, what seasons are best for catching them, whether crabs, lobsters, or prawns can be harvested commercially, and other similar data that could help a country exploit its fishery resources in a scientific and well-organized manner. It may be that learning to use this whole range of equipment was what the chief Caribbean scientist on the first leg had in mind for his fellow scientists when he spoke of his expectations for them.
Well, I think we expect several things. First and foremost, we expect to learn how to operate on board a ship. We expect to gain a fair amount of experience operating systems in a working environment, working alongside our engine counterparts. We also expect to get quite a lot of good data on the Caribbean, which is not available to us before. And thirdly, I think we are going to develop an understanding, which we've never had before, of the marine environment.
Saga Kania's main operation center is the bridge, where all instruments necessary for maneuvering and navigating the vessel are located. It is important that the navigational aids on the vessel are as advanced as the scientific equipment it carries. Otherwise, it may not be able to meet the requirements of the scientists as they go about their work. At this point in the cruise, the vessel was on its way to Barbados, where a group of journalists from a number of Commonwealth countries had an opportunity to tour the ship. They were in Barbados attending a meeting of the Commonwealth Journalists Association, CJA, an association that itself uses Commonwealth cooperation for training in its field. As the journalists moved about the vessel talking to some of the scientists, they were able to get an idea of some aspects of the results of the survey so far.
We have come much closer to understanding a bit more about the relationship between the ocean and the atmosphere. In our area, we're in that part frequented by severe weather systems such as hurricanes. Hurricanes have the ocean surface as their primary source of energy. So our understanding of the characteristics and the relationship between this atmosphere-ocean system is of tremendous benefit to us as we move forward to fine-tuning our models that we use to predict the occurrences, the path, and frequencies of these giant killers, which are responsible for a lot of loss of life and damage to property in the region. With respect to global warming and accelerated sea level rise, that is of immediate concern to the governments of the region because the islands are classified as island states. That means they are very susceptible to sea level rise. You need to know the bathymetric conditions. You need other parameters that will enable governments to maintain or come up with new programs or projects to protect these coastal states. Again, this is of utmost importance because almost all these islands have tourism as their #1 income earner. So having this sort of information, it will assist our policy and decision makers better in coming up with informed decisions.
In addition to contributing to this kind of understanding of the Caribbean Sea, the survey pinpointed the location of a sunken vessel, noted a rise in the formation of coral reefs, updated navigational charts of the area, came up with evidence to suggest that there is a good case for oil and other mineral exploration, and established that there are fertile fishing grounds to be harvested.
We found what we had planned to look for, which was out of the number of stations around St. Lucia to get an idea of the variation of temperature with depth. And what we're specifically looking for is the depth of the thermocline, where you have a rapid decrease in temperature at a certain depth. And from the work that we've done, we've located that quite accurately. And this is important because a variety of midwater pelagic fish species, like certain types of tuna and swordfish, will tend to migrate along this depth. And we want to start going into that type of fishing in St. Lucia. So this is very valuable information for that.
The fishery around this area is good with particular reference to the flying fish. And I personally would recommend these respective governments to undertake a detailed survey, systematic survey of this area for the fishery resources, so that the fishing community in this area will be highly benefited.
With very little exception, the economies of these countries are largely tied to tourism, the export of agricultural commodities, and some fishing. It is not so much to lessen their dependence on these industries that they are so interested in this survey, but more so to expand their economic base to include the resources now available to them under the provisions of the Law of the Sea Convention. The Convention grants maritime states sovereign rights over the living and non-living resources above, on, and below the seabed within an exclusive economic zone that may extend up to 200 nautical miles. So there is much at stake, and this survey has come at an appropriate time. There were fears, for example, of oil pollution. To the relief of all concerned, the survey showed that there is hardly any trace of this, but suggested that there is no room for complacency. The situation should be monitored all the time. Once in Grenada waters, the survey was faced with what has now come to be known as the Kikemjeni volcano. This underwater volcano could have spelt disaster, but once again, to the relief of all concerned, it didn't.
What we did was a survey of the shape of the volcano. This is a submarine volcano that erupted as recently as March, and it's of great interest to the people in the Caribbean because, one, it's of its proximity to Grenada. Therefore, you have the aspect of disaster preparedness and the sort of plans one must make in case that this volcano should erupt explosively. And also, it's a very good chance for us to do a case study of a very young volcano.
Okay, the volcano, going over the volcano was a pretty unique experience for the three geology people on board at the time. All of us found this was a first for all of us. While the volcano was a little bit disappointing because it wasn't active while we were over there, even though I don't think the captain was too upset about that, the data we collected is going to be very useful in the future, because the next time it erupts, people will be able to look at the changes in the depth and the height of the volcano, and they'll be able to see the changes due to the volcanoes actually erupting.
The area is coming back to normalcy. But there is also an indication that there are a couple of points where there is a possibility of having some sort of action, volcanic action, and which can be pursued further to exploit this area for getting geothermal energy if we can make use of the appropriate technology.
As the vessel headed for Trinidad, there was delight that the situation around Kikemjeni was coming back to normal. Only a few months earlier, temperatures near the volcano were so high that the fish that usually use the area as their feeding grounds headed north to find cooler waters. Now they are returning to Grenada. In Trinidad, there was much interest in the survey, both from members of the public and the scientific community. The values of ammonia in the sea during this leg from Barbados to Trinidad were higher than they ought to have been, indicating that there was pollution of the type that could come from the passenger vessels that cruise these waters. The better news for Trinidad and Tobago, however, concerned the flying fish.
The area which we have studied shows a very good indication about the flying fish resources of Tobago. Of course, this observation is not only during this particular leg, but it is coupled with the next leg also to some extent, and based on partly leg 3 as well as leg 4, I would say that the fishery resources of flying fish around Tobago are quite good.
As Saga Kania left Trinidad for Guyana on the fourth and final leg of the survey, there was a certain degree of excitement among the scientists on board, as this part of their work was to be carried out in an area where the flow of two of the world's great rivers, the Amazon and the Orinoco, mix with the Caribbean Sea. Much of the data from here and from the entire 45-day cruise is still being studied. A great deal of it is restricted. What is available at the moment is contained in a report that is more than 2 inches thick. It is written in scientific language, supported by many graphs and charts that make sense to the scientists. But in summary for the layman, it confirms that the freshwater discharges from the Amazon and the Orinoco are of great significance to Trinidad and Guyana. For one thing, the data collected would help these countries determine and locate sources of pollution, while for another, it would help establish whether sediments brought down by these rivers could at some future date be processed into non-chemical fertilizers on a massive scale. Barring some isolated sites, plankton distribution was high throughout, indicating that there is hardly any pollution due to petroleum spills. There are also indications that the region west of Jamaica may be suitable for exploring for non-living resources, such as minerals, and that the eastern shelf of Trinidad has good potential for oil. The conclusion that can be drawn from all this is that sustainable exploitation of the Caribbean Sea for development is possible, but vigilance must be the watchword. Such vigilance, for the immediate future anyway, seems assured in the hands of the Caribbean scientists who took part in the survey.